you. Wow. Thank you for these visions. I think, well, everybody is now, we don't know what to do, we don't know what to say, and we won't let them ask questions. So, we just, I'm not allowed.
Oh, I went too long. But just ask. Oh.
The picture, yes, we can do that. Okay.
Well, okay, yeah. Let's think of a nice question. Hands up in the air if you think landscape architects are the best professions in the world. There's one for in the picture book. Thank you very much.
That's amazing. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Eric. It was inspiring. Oh, great. So very quickly, I have to call the next speaker. I would invite Professor Jala Masumi to join us. She's a professor of landscape architecture in the American University in Beirut, so in the Lebanon, and she has been practicing there for 35 years. So she's basically the pioneer of ecological planning and design in there. So welcome, Jala.
Good afternoon. Oh, sorry, something went wrong. I put my. Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, IFLA and NLA, for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak today. I would like to share with you experiences from the Global South, focusing on landscape architecture and people, communities. Unfortunately, I will be taking you a step back in time and not into the future that we just experienced. For people of my generation, the commons and common ground recalls the environmental revolution of the 70s. And those two seminal books are very much, have a lot in common with what we are talking about today, even if at a different scale of environmental damage. So Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons and the book Only One Earth, commissioned by the Secretary of the UN Conference on the Environment that was held in Stockholm. Then the paradigm was different. Environment was very much about resources, air, water, land, and pollution. There were national treaties, and it was very top-heavy. Design and designers, their role was marginal, but engineers were playing a big role in combating pollution and everything. People were the recipients. They were, at the end, supposedly benefiting from what was happening. A lot has happened, yes, a lot of problems with our planet, but also something very encouraging. People have taken charge of the environment, and they are now the driving force. Of course, states and governments treaties are still there, but people are in charge, and environment has a different meaning. Environment is not about objective resources, but about heritage, livelihoods, and identity. And the designer plays a different role, because the designer is the mediator and facilitator between the top policies and what the people want. Another thing happened since. Landscape architecture was a almost very small and marginal profession. This has changed. Landscape today, as this conference reflects, has taken a much bigger role. The European Landscape Convention was a very, very important event, but IFLA is also growing and taking a much bigger role, as are individual architects, all of us. And I think the recent declarations of the urgency of facing global climate change and biodiversity are simply reflections of this. Another change is that in scholarship, there is also a focus on the intangible, not just the tangible landscape. For example, the right to landscape, which a project which we did with Professor Shelley Igos and Gloria Punchetti, a workshop, and which was then published, looks at the Declaration on Human Rights and landscape and the intersection between the two, landscape that supports existence and landscape that supports dignity. Similarly, defining landscape democracy, this was here. It happened in 2015 in the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and the conference was in Oskarburg on landscape democracy. And the university now has a Center for Landscape Democracy to dialogue these issues, and the book has just came out. I would like to share with you 3 examples from my part of the world to show what challenges we face and how we tackle them. It's a very different environment to where we are now. But before that, I'd like to read something from Naomi Klein. She says that if we are ever to cope with climate change in any fundamental way, radical solutions on the social sides are where we must focus. And then she continues and says that it's really human power and not always solar power. The first example I will share with you is from post-war reconstruction or recovery in Lebanon. This was a project that once, in 2006, the war with Israel, there was a very big blanket bombing of southern Lebanon and the southern suburb of Beirut. And a group of us at the University of Beirut formed the Reconstruction Unit. And at first there was skepticism. I mean, landscape, what can you do for post-war reconstruction? I mean, will you make gardens? And it was a breakthrough for us because we could show how we can tackle this very sad and difficult landscape. We set up a studio, a landscape studio for third-year landscape students in the village of Elayli. I taught the course with Rabia Shibli, and the village core, where the question mark is, was totally demolished. But we don't care for the village core. We wanted to look at the total landscape. This is what landscape architects do. They look expansively. And looking at the village itself, we conceptualized 3 sites. The coastal landscape was taken by one group, the agriculture fields in the coastal plain, and the cultural heritage, which was a biblical site with a Byzantine church and a mosque and ruins. And as you can see, for each group, there was an aim, stakeholders, outcome. And look at the diversity of aims: biodiversity conservation, reviving agriculture, celebrating heritage, and similarly with the stakeholders and the outcome. Of course, the students went down, and they discussed the project with local inhabitants, but then when they presented to the community members, I overheard 2 of the municipal members whispering, saying, you know something? These projects can be implemented. We can do them. We don't even need much funding. So that was really an indication that these projects made sense. They were practical and simple, and they could contribute to post-war recovery. The one project that took off, don't forget this is a studio, and we move on, unfortunately, in academics. But the one project that did succeed was the coastal part. We pooled with SPNL, the Society for Protection of Nature in Lebanon, and we declared the coast as a HIMA, which is a community-based conservation, a concept which has since been adopted by IUCN. And it is a turtle nesting site, and there are birds, it's a bird sanctuary, and the tower for the UN observation tower was converted into a bird watching thing. Just as importantly, with several other projects, also landscape-based, the university decided that it will establish the Center for Civic Engagement and Community Service. And the director, and really the dynamo behind it, is Rabi' Shibli, who was my collaborator in the studio. And this center is now the focal point in the region for Syrian refugees in Lebanon, because really this is a very big problem. The second program, so focusing on community. The first one was really looking at the community through this lens that I just, recovery, post-war recovery. Here in this project, this is a project for urban sustainable development funded by the EU and the directorship of MedCities. It's very interesting because a participatory approach was dictated. The methodology was very clear. It had to be participatory. So and you can see this in the statement of MedCities, where they look to, they move away from master plans, which is very much the fashion in a lot of regions in the global south, towards strategic plans that use social and economic agents, neighbors, unions, entrepreneurs, serving as active players. Very important, this was mentioned also by Professor Bava, interdisciplinarity. We have to collaborate. It's very important. So you can see there's heritage, there's economy, governance, there's infrastructure, and there is actually ecology and environment. Landscape was not there. And when I said landscape, the consultant overseeing our work said, "No, I'm sorry, you don't understand. This is not about gardens. This is a serious project. It's about urban development, sustainable urban development." And the argument was that without the landscape, the studies in environment and ecology will be filed as reports and be forgotten in drawers. The landscape will spatialize them and animate them, and that's exactly what happened. The methodology looks at those stakeholders, included state agencies, not just the local community, local institutions, civic society, and NGOs. And under each one of those disciplines you saw before, there was a working group, and made up of those, of course, schools and many others. The agenda for which I was in charge on was water resources. Seasonal rivers and seasonal water courses, the sea, agricultural landscape. Saida has incredible agricultural landscapes, still thriving, and green open spaces. It's a long process, but in brief, this is the plan that we developed. Our idea was to revive the rivers as green corridors to separate storm water from sewage water, which was the case, and they were all discharging in the seasonal water courses, some of which were channelized and covered, and also rain collection and storage to use. So these were a lot of the strategies, but the idea was also to revive the green abandoned railway corridor and to look at all of it as a blue-green network. And sorry, but you can see in the final strategic plan how these ideas and the network really it anchors the plan. This is a table that I prepared where it shows those components we dealt with and how they contribute to each one of the sectors, to environmental health, to socioeconomic benefits, heritage, and quality living. So this is, again, landscape. More important is two NGOs took some of the ideas. Shajaru Bashar, trees and people, work with youth across religious divide to encourage governance and taking responsibility. So they did a lot of activities with the railway, cleaning it, reclaiming it, and it was an incredible addition. This is post-project. Another is Lil Medina for the city, an initiative by architects and planners, and we had a presentation today by Lynn Jabri, who is a founder. And they worked to reclaim. The ideas we put forth were great, but they were ideas. But Lil Medina took one of those watercourses and has been working relentlessly to protect the Amli River. A book was published reminding people that it is a heritage and how people used it as a communal space. And more importantly, the rivers are very important because if you look at the religious composition of Saida, in yellow is municipal Saida, and you can see the religious factions, Sunni, Christian, Shiite, and Palestinian. It's the largest Palestinian camp. So the municipality was not very happy. They did not want to collaborate outside the limits of the municipality. But we argued that it should. We succeeded to a point. But with Lil Medina working on Al-Amli, they collaborated with the opposing municipalities, and it was very successful. However, the real challenge was the municipality. First of all, our proposition for the watercourses was ridiculed. They never accepted it. Even when we got funding for it, they thought this is silly. I mean, there's sewers and everything is done. I mean, why do you want to open it up? Why do you want to revive them? So there is very much opposition. As to the municipality has blacklisted both of those NGOs, labeling them as troublemakers because they will not accept the scenario that is proposed by the... So these are some of the challenges that are faced. The third and last project is the Erbil Green Belt in Iraq. Erbil is the capital of the Kurdistan regional government. It's a citadel town that is very old, one of the oldest. And the Green Belt was proposed by the previous master plan, and Khatib and Alami, lead consultant in Lebanon, established a team of interdisciplinary GIS, agronomists, planners, and myself as landscape planner to undertake the project. The aim is to stop informal settlements encroachment and some climatic sheltering, and also an amenity landscape. Before I go to the project, I'd like to share with you another change, paradigm change in heritage. Heritage in the 60s and earlier on was very much an international and top-heavy, where UNESCO and IUCN would dictate. And many times this doesn't work because it's blanket policies. Living heritage is a bottom-up approach. And this table, which is from Pietro Loriano from IFLA Congress in Turin, says it all. World Heritage Convention has a fixed definition. The new landscape vision is regionally adapted, evolving. There is no separation of nature and culture. There is integration, not outstanding value, but everyday value. Heritage institution, common and lay people. This is the landscape of the Erbil Green Belt. It's a beautiful landscape, hilly, with 23 impoverished villages and agriculture, rain-fed agriculture, pastoral lands, and a very intricate network of seasonal water courses. It is also a sad landscape because the southern part has suffered total demolition and razing of villages by the Saddam regime it was part of the Kurdish genocide. So what remains is only cemeteries. Problematic was the vision of the client. The client assured us when we arrived that don't worry, we're almost finished with expropriating the land for the site, and the villages will be transported elsewhere, the people in these villages, and the villages demolished. Their concept, it's not that they were bad, it's just that this is the way they conceived of the Green Belt, as total blanket reforestation with forest-type trees, and that's it. The people can go somewhere else. So The vision we developed was people-centered, multifunctional landscape that embodies the complementarity between sustainable agriculture, natural and cultural heritage. We look to pastoral uses, we look to fruit trees instead of forest trees, we look to animal farming, we looked also to ecotourism and nature tourism, and people are in the center. And these are some of the sketches that we developed. This is more or less a sketch of the master plan, which has all of those layers. It has the northern and southern greenway, rangeland reforestation, limited, sustainable agriculture, amenity, and landscape. I'll guide you very quickly through some of them. This is the northern and southern greenways, protecting the watercourse, using it to connect the city with the hinterland, and also provide bird sanctuary because it's on the migratory route. This is the, instead of blanket forestation, we proposed village shelter belts and cadastral shelter belts, which create a lattice which is just as efficient in climatic sheltering. This is what the client asked for, amenity, landscape, security, and also we proposed a village heritage trail where people can move through. How did we convince the client to change their view? Basically, it's a new region and Kurds are looking for their identity. So we said, look, the rural landscape in the Greenbelt is your heritage, it is your identity, and it is beautiful and it should remain and be celebrated. And they were convinced because they wanted this very much. And this is how we convinced them to, again, this multiple matrix where you can see landscape taking existing components, village, pastoral lands, reforested lands, agriculture, and reconceptualizing them into the landscape, but covering socioeconomic value, heritage, ecology, and environment. And everything is integrated within this. Putting people first is, of course, part of participatory approach, but sometimes they haven't heard of participatory approach, and sometimes lip service is given to participatory approach. It is also an ethical responsibility of us as landscape architects, and as architects also as designers, to shoulder this ethical responsibility, to watch out for social justice and use all the powers we have to convince the client that this is wrong and an alternative should be taken. This is my concluding slide. I thought a lot about the title, Common Grounds. The thing is that I was dying to add an S because the difference, the challenges are so different on an ecological level, on an institutional support level, on an awareness of level of landscape, social, economic, political, but also there is but a handful of architects in the region, landscape architects. So it's such a big challenge. Common to whom? Is it common to us? I don't know, I'm not sure. I wanted very much to add that S, but on second thoughts, I thought that a landscape architecture framing is an incredible thing. It addresses environment and space, like the examples I tried to show. It looks to tangible but intangible values, people, memories, identity, politics, and rights and justice. So I hope that landscape architects can work to remove that S, and we will have a common ground for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Jala, I think it was an proper thing to say, common grounds, diversity. It was a reality check, your lecture, so that we could go back to reality. So for the last, we have a vision, the vision of somebody that comes from another background. She comes from a strong background of environmental science.